So tell me, is this American sailor really, really smart or really, really dumb? Now the guy's name is Doug, and Doug is 20 when this story starts, and he's living in Clark, South Dakota, and Doug really wants to get out of this small town, and he wants to see the world. So in 1966, he starts thinking about joining the military. I mean, he's never been a hero type, but joining the military will get him out of this small town and he'll get to see the world while he figures out what to do with his life. So he enlists in the Navy. And a year later, in 1967, he's already deployed in the South China Sea. And the Vietnam War is going on. So one night, Doug is aboard a U.S. warship in the Gulf of Tonkin, which is bordered by Vietnam, when suddenly, kaboom, the ship starts firing on some targets on the coast. And the crew on board, they're working together loading the ship's massive turrets, and blam, 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 they're firing. And this goes on for hours. Now Doug, he's below deck, trying to sleep, and he can't because of all the chaos going on above. So he climbs up to the deck to watch what's going on. And as soon as he comes out, blam! One of the ship's guns fires again, and boom! The blast is so powerful that it sends a shockwave that knocks Doug straight off the boat and into the water. And immediately he starts screaming, "Help!" But it's dark, and the guns are really loud, and everyone is focused on the battle. So no one hears him or even realizes that he's gone. And the ship keeps moving. And a few minutes later, it's totally gone. And poor Doug, he's completely alone in the middle of the ocean, far from home. And the coast is just too far away to swim to. Now, luckily, Doug is a strong swimmer and he's able to keep himself afloat. And hours pass. And he's still out there and he's still treading water, hoping that his ship will come back and find him. Then, a boat appears with some fishermen on it, and they've spotted Doug and they pull him aboard. Now, these guys are North Vietnamese, which means that they're on the opposing side of the war. But whatever, there's not much Doug can do. He's been floating for hours now, and he needs all the help he can get. Now, eventually, they get to land, and they hand Doug over to North Vietnamese soldiers. And from there, he's then taken to the infamous prison called the Hoa Lo, or the Hanoi Hilton, where lots of American prisoners of war are held. And so, the North Vietnamese question Doug, and he tells them, "I fell off my ship." And they don't believe his story for a second. I mean, no one accidentally falls off a warship and survives for hours in the ocean and then just happens to be rescued by fishermen. So they start thinking he's a spy. And Doug, he quickly realizes that he's in serious danger. I mean, if they believe he's a spy, they might torture him to try and get intel out of him. They might even kill him. And obviously he doesn't want that. So he comes up with a plan. He's gonna convince them that he's a total dumbass who's completely useless to them. Maybe then they'll just take him to prison and not kill him. So when the soldiers start interrogating him, he acts like an idiot. Like he acts all confused and he pretends that he doesn't understand what they're asking. And when he does give an answer, he just says complete nonsense. But the soldiers keep pressing him and they keep threatening him. But Doug, he never breaks character. He keeps making himself look like the dumbest sailor they've ever met. And hours pass, and the North Vietnamese have gotten nowhere with him. So finally, they give up. They start believing that maybe Doug is actually an idiot who somehow fell off his own ship. In fact, they become so convinced of his stupidity that they nickname him the Incredibly Stupid One. And so ultimately, they decide to throw him into a prison cell. And here's where the story gets real interesting. So Doug gets thrown into a cell with this guy, Stratton. And Stratton happens to be a lieutenant commander of the Navy. So now they're spending a lot of time together and they get to talking a lot. And pretty quickly, Stratton realizes that what Doug is doing is actually kind of genius. Because if the guards think he's an idiot, they'll think he's harmless and they'll keep their guard down. Which means that while he's a prisoner of war, Doug might be able to gather valuable intelligence for the United States. So he encourages Doug to keep the act going. And that's exactly what Doug does. He keeps acting like a dumbass day after day after day. And before long, the prison guards become completely comfortable around him. Like they trust him now. And unlike most prisoners, they allow him to move freely around the prison camp, doing small jobs like sweeping and cleaning and stuff. And Doug, he makes the most of his freedom. Whenever no one's looking, he'll quietly sabotage their equipment. He'll pour handfuls of dirt and sand into the fuel tanks of their military trucks. He also watches the troop movements around the camp, and he memorizes the prison camp's layout and the exact location. And at one point, the North Vietnamese soldiers try using Doug in propaganda pieces. They want him to write anti-American statements, and they want him to be featured in anti-war broadcasts. But when they hand him a script for a confession that he's supposed to write, he basically just tells them he's illiterate. And he's always acted kind of off, so they believe him. They even try to get him a tutor to teach him to read so that they could then use him for the propaganda, but he continues to act too stupid to be taught. So eventually, they give up. Now, regarding what Stratton suggested he do, which is gather up intelligence just in case he's rescued, Doug is all over that idea. So he begins secretly meeting with American prisoners throughout the camp, and he memorizes everything he can about them. Their names, their ranks, even many of their social security numbers. But he never writes any of this information down. Because if the North Vietnamese soldiers find that he's actually literate and much smarter than he let on, then they'll probably go back to believing that he's a spy, and then they could potentially execute him. So instead of writing all that stuff down, Doug commits everything to memory by turning the names and stuff into songs using the tune of Old MacDonald Had a Farm. So, over the next several months, he memorizes information on around 256 American prisoners of war, which could be very useful information. However, at this point, it isn't clear if he's ever going to get out of this place. Until 1969. It's around this time that the North Vietnamese decide to release a small group of American prisoners as sort of a PR move. And one of the prisoners they decide to release is Doug. So they let him go, and after 852 days of being in lockup, he finally gets to return to the United States. And he is immediately debriefed by military intelligence, and he gives them everything. All the information that he memorized during his captivity, the names of the other POWs, their capture dates, their personal details, camp conditions, the torture, the layout, even the route to the prison that he had memorized. And all this information proves extremely valuable to the US military because it helps them account for missing American troops, and it shows them where they're being held. And so now the North Vietnamese can't quietly execute any of the troops because they're accounted for. Which, like I said, Doug didn't get into all this to be a hero, but ultimately, he ended up being a hero. And while the US didn't win this war, Doug himself was ultimately nominated for numerous military honors, and he ends up being awarded the Prisoner of War Medal. So, good for him.